In this video tutorial, we're going to be creating randomized model assets using advanced simulated rigid bodies. Okay, in the viewport here, you can see we've got a rock. It's called rock_001. Let's go and open up the manage layers. So we'll go and hide the rock. We'll unhide the log. So you can see we've got this log in our scene. Let's go and hide that. And we've also got a surfboard, a big shark bite out of it. All these objects are textured, and all their UVs are laid out in a way that I can use one texture to texture all three objects. So we're just going to open up the material editor, and you can see it here. Here's our material. Let's go and have a look at the actual material that I've used. So here we've got our surfboard texture, here we've got our log, and here we've got the rock. So the reason I've done that is because the whole aim of this tutorial is to show you how you can create basically randomized clutter or repetitive objects in your scene that are sort of that need to have a random aspect or a nature to them. Okay, so we'll leave the actually we'll just go and hide the surfboard. We'll make sure this little tick's on the default layer, and if we just right click in these viewports, hit Z, we can reset them because nothing's in the scene. It's not going to zoom into anything, it's just going to reset them. Let's go to the Create tab. Let's go to the Standard Primitives, Geometry Standard Primitives, and we're going to create a plane. So what we're going to be doing now is creating some land for these objects to basically fall onto and create our randomized advanced simulated assets. Okay, so making sure that the creation method for the plane is set to square. Let's click and drag in the top viewport. You should be creating all your objects in the top viewport. Everything basically, if you do that, everything will have the Z-axis going in the correct direction. The only exception to this would be if you're creating bones. Okay, so we've got our plane in there. Let's go and give it a name. So we'll call it land_02. Let's go to the modify tab and adjust some of the settings for this plane. So let's make it quite big. So we'll make it 30 by 30 and make the length segs and the width segs 10 by 10. And let's maximize the perspective viewport. That's Alt W. We'll hit Z to zoom out. So now we've got our land there. We just need to make it look a little bit less like a flat plane. Okay, so to do that, we're going to select the land object, right click on it, and go convert to editable poly. We're going to go and select polygon selection mode. You can see that it's there. We can go and select, say, let's go and select 5 polygons. Any 5 sort of like in the corner area. So what I want to do is basically change my selection to the vertices that make up the selected polygon. So 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. So to do that, here under the selection rollout, you can't do this in the stack. You can only do it down here. If we hold down Control and I click, say, the vertex that I want to go to, you can see that it's selected all the vertices that made up those polygons we had selected. It's a really quick little way to go and change the type of sub-object to what you've already got selected. Okay, so now that we've got that, let's go down to the soft selection rollout. If it's closed, open it. Click on Use Soft Selection. So basically you can see that whatever's red is at 100% selected. So let's go and increase the fall off. So blue is the, say, 0.1 of the selection. Then you go to green, yellow, and then orange. So we want to bring that down so we've got some blue in the scene there. And now we grab our move tool and we can start to modify the topology there. So that's alright. Might just grab this one here and sort of lower this down. Not do the same with this one. Lower it down. Grab this one. This one, I can create a bit of a sort of a valley in there, and when I'm happy with that, I can deselect my vertices. Okay, so you can see that it's very flat looking at the moment. Let's go and sort of make this a little bit more natural looking. So we can do that by having the land object selected, clicking on the modify list and going all the way to the bottom where it says Turbo Smooth. So let's click on that once. You can see it's put an iteration in there. So effectively what Turbo Smooth has done, if I just disable the modifier by turning off the little light switch here, the light bulb, you can see that we look at and keep looking at this square. I'm just going to turn on this thing while we're looking at the square. You can see it's divided it into 4, so that square now is 1, 2, 3, 4. So it's subdivided the mesh, and that's why it's called a subdivision surface modifier. Okay, and in effect that's made the landmass a little bit more natural looking, a little bit more softer. Okay, we can go ahead and sort of modify this a little bit more. So let's go onto the modify list again. Let's go down here and we're going to select a noise modifier. I'm going to check fractal, and then I'm going to increase the strength on the Z-axis. So you can see this yellow gizmo. You can see as I increase it, it's affecting the actual mesh itself. So just bring that up to there. I can also adjust the scale to make it sort of bigger, so more not quite as dramatic a change. You can see as I make it smaller, it's more dramatic. Make it bigger, it sort of smooths it out a bit. So I'm happy with that. Okay, so we've got our land. One thing I want to point out with Mass Effects is that it doesn't recognize on the Z-axis. It doesn't recognize anything below the origin. So nothing at a minus level of the Z-axis. So if I go into hit F, go into the front viewport, you can see here's the Z-axis line. So Mass Effects only recognizes anything in this, above this black line here. Anything below it won't recognize. So if we have objects that we want to fall down into this depression here, they're not going to go there. They're just going to sit. It's going to recognize this as one big flat plane. So we need to actually make sure that that's sitting above that. It's just something I needed to point out to you if you do have any dramas with it. Okay, so now that we've got our land, we're happy with that. Let's go up to our manage layers. Let's unhide the surfboard first. If you can't see it, it's there. We can hit F3 and you can see it in there. It might be a little bit hard to select. So if we expand this little this surfboard layer by clicking on the little plus icon here, we can go and select the surfboard, right click on it and go select. So we can now lift this up a little bit. If we hit F3, we can see it now. Let's hit T on the keyboard to go to the top viewport. What we're going to do is we're going to basically use a compound object, that's what it's called, to scatter the surfboard over an area. So we could use it to scatter it over this plane area, but it's not going to interact with it. It's going to interpenetrate all over it. So it's no good for what we want really. So, but it's going to be good to sort of move our surfboard over an area, so we can then apply the Mass Effects later on to it, and you'll see what I mean as we do it. So let's click on the Create tab here. Let's go down to Compound Objects, making sure that you have the surfboard selected. And actually, before we do that, let's go back up. Let's go up to Standard Primitives. Click off the surfboard. We're going to create a plane. Sorry about that. We need to create our distribution object first. So we're going to go to Square Method. We'll hit F3 so we can see when we're creating it. We'll just click and drag out in the middle there. We're going to make it say about 15 by 15 meters. We'll leave it at 10 by 10. We go hit F, go to our front viewport. We can lift that up just underneath the surfboard. Hit P to go back and hit F3 again. So let's go once again, select our surfboard. Go here, Compound Objects. Making sure the surfboard selected, we're going to go scatter. By clicking on this scatter with the surfboard selected, we have actually changed how 3ds Max looks at this object. It is now not just a editable poly anymore, it is now a scatter object, as you can see when we go to the Modify tab. Okay, it's still called surfboard, but Max is now recognizing it as a scatter object. So the first thing I like to do is scroll down till you see this display rollout. If it's closed, open it and click on this hide distribution object, because when we go and pick the distribution object, which will be this plane, the scatter object will then create a duplicate of that, and we'll end up having to do this 3 times. We don't want all those duplicates. We just want this original one. Okay, so let's go pick distribution object. We'll go and click on our plane here, and you can see the surfboard's moved onto the plane. Okay, so what I want to do is have a whole heap of different surfboards on this plane. So let's go duplicates. Let's change this to 15. So now you can see it's moved across. They are in this pattern though. Let's see if we can break that up a little bit by clicking on a different distribution object parameter. So we'll click on random faces, and you can see we've got some interpenetration, some overlapping here. So down on the display, let's click on uniqueness and try and find one that doesn't have our surfboards all interpenetrating with each other. So I might just keep clicking until I find one that I really like. Okay, so let's say I'm happy with that one. What I'm going to do now is go to my transforms, and I'm going to, up the top under rotations, I'm going to click on use maximum range, which will mean when you can see these two are grayed out when I click on that. What happens is that I can only adjust this one, but it will adjust all 3 the same amount. So I'll click and I'll drag, I'll rotate. You can see now that I'm actually getting quite a lot of rotation in those, different rotation. So I'm happy with that, and I'm going to leave that like that. I can also make the size a little bit different, because they will have a slightly different size surfboards, but not a great amount. So I'm going to make sure we use maximum range, but I'm also going to lock the aspect ratio. So I'll show you what happens if I don't lock the aspect ratio. So now I'm going to go scaling. You can see I get some really thin, long surfboards. It just doesn't look right. If I lock aspect ratio, it's just going to make some bigger and some smaller. So I'll only raise that up a very small amount. So there's only a little bit of difference. Okay, so I'm going to lift up those surfboards, get them out of the way for the moment. I'm going to now go to my manage layers. I'm going to unhide, let's go for the rock. I'm going to go and select the rock. I'm going to lift it up above that plane, just above it. I'm going to go scatter, scroll down. So we're basically repeating our steps. Hide distribution object, pick the distribution object. I'm going to say let's make it 100. So I'm happy with the placement of that. That's good. Let's go to transforms. Let's go with rotation. So I'll rotate these quite a bit. I'm going to do the scaling again. Make some really big, make some really small. And I'm happy with that. So I'm then going to just raise that up. Let's go to our manage layers again. Unhide the log. Let's go and select it. Oops. And lift that up. Once again, shut this down, scatter. Go down, hide the distribution object. Pick the distribution object, and let's make it say 50. Get down to our transforms. Use maximum range for the rotation. I'm going to rotate that. I'm going to adjust the scaling on some. And when I'm happy with that, I'm just going to lift that up. So now we've got our 3 objects there. We don't need this distribution plane anymore, so we can select it and hit delete on our keyboard. I'm going to convert all of these into polygons. So let's select, so basically these are like 3 objects at the moment. So let's see, they're all the one object. So I'll select them all, right click and go convert to editable poly. So now you can see that they're editable polys and not scatter objects. Okay, the next thing we need to do at the moment, if we ran a simulation, change these to dynamic rigid bodies, change the land to a static rigid body, it's still going to treat all these rocks as one object, and we need to let MassFX know that these are all individual objects. So we need to basically detach them all. So we could physically go in there, I could go to them, I could go and select one rock, I could go detach, go to the next rock, go detach. That's going to take too long. So what we're going to do is we're going to use some code. We're going to run some code that's been typed out in the text document, and we're going to basically turn it into some script and run that, and that code's going to break these objects into individual objects. So let's first off go and select all our surfboards. Let's go to, I want you to open up that TXT document, which will be called detach something, and have a look now exactly what it will be called. It will be called detach polytext. So here we go. So what I want you to do is to go and select this text. So highlight it like that, all of it, including the brackets, and go Control-C, copy. Now close that. Let's go up to the Max script here. We're going to go New Script. We're going to go Paste. We're going to paste that code that we just copied from that Notepad document in here. With our surfboard selected, we're going to go Control-E for execute. So we've just executed this script in here. So you can see that now all these surfboards are individual objects rather than all one object. So once again, let's, with these rocks selected, put our cursor up there, Control-E, we're going to run that. So now you can see that they're all individual objects, and we're going to do the same for the logs, Control-E. And now they're all individual. That's a pretty handy bunch of code there. So what we might do as well is you can save this. So let's go File, Save As, and here you can see I've already previously saved it, so you can give it a name. I've called it detach multi_objects, and it'll write it out as a .ms, or you can put .ms and just save that. Let's go yes. And you can go back, and if you wanted to use that script again, you can just go Max script and select your object, and then go Run script, navigate to where it is, double click on it, and it will perform it without having to copy and paste, etc. So we can close down this script now. Okay, so we're pretty much ready to run our simulation. Let's select land and set this up first. So select land, we'll go up to the MassFX toolbar. Remember, if you don't see it in 3ds Max, right click on this grey area up here and go MassFX toolbar. Let's click on set dynamic object as static rigid body. So you can see now that it's put these funny lines sort of covering it. So what would happen is if we made these dynamic objects and simulated it, it's sort of looking at these lines as like planes, so it wouldn't actually touch the surface or go down into this valley in here. It would sort of sit up here like we had a plane along here and just sort of lie flat on that. So we need to change the shape type for this object. So at the moment it's set to convex. Let's click on the drop down and let's set it to original. And you can see those lines are now gone. So when these fall, they're going to read the actual surface, the actual shape of this land mesh here. Okay, so that's it for the land one. Let's go and select all the surfboards first. So we'll go and click on this one and go set selected as dynamic rigid body. Let's click on the MassFX tools. Let's go to the third tab along, and under rigid body properties, let's change the preset to cardboard. These are more like cardboard rather than a heavy object like steel or concrete. we'll leave the mesh type as convex, and should all be good for that one. Let's go and select these other objects, the other rocks and the logs. Make sure they're all selected. Don't want the surfboard selected again. Let's turn them into dynamic rigid bodies, and we're going to make the preset for these guys concrete. That's fairly close for the logs and the rocks. Okay, so now we should be ready to go and see what this simulation looks like. So I'm just going to zoom out a bit. I'm going to deselect everything. I might hit F4 too, so I get a better look at what's happening. Rotate my viewport around. I'm going to go to the simulation tab, and I'm going to click on Start Simulation, and let's see what happens. Yeah, we've got a few funny ones flying off everywhere, but apart from that, it's pretty good. I'm liking that. That's good. If we don't like it, we can go back. We could probably go and select a few of the. Let's change the height that they're all falling from. That might help with the ones that are sort of bouncing off everywhere. And now we can go and start that simulation again. So now it's falling. Oh, we've still got some flying everywhere. Some rocks rolling down the hills. So it's bouncing around. You still always get a little bit of crazy stuff happening. Some stuff in here, I don't know what's happening. Jumping around a bit still. It's alright. Let's just stop that and reset it. Another thing we might want to do is adjust the timeline here. So down here, down where all your viewport controls are, you can see we've got time configuration. Let's click on that. Let's change the, first off, the frame rate to PAL, which is Australian television. NTSC is what American television is, and PAL's, I suppose, a little bit closer to film. Not that it really matters, but I always like to do that. And of course, when I do that, it's gone from, instead of 30 frames a second, down to 25, which has made the actual end frame here not 100 but 83. So let's change this to 300. Okay. And we're going to start the simulation again. Let me settle a bit. And now I'm going to go capture, transform. Before I do that, I'm going to make sure I have all these objects selected except for the land, and I'm going to go capture, transform. So now, if I reset the simulation, you can see that some of the logs that went sort of flying everywhere have reset themselves, and the other ones now are using this position as their standing position. So I'm going to go there, close that. I'm going to select everything by going Control A. I'm going to right click on it and go convert to editable poly, and that has effectively removed the mass effects modifier from it. So I can go in here and start to delete the objects. Let's see, we've got some that have passed through. Delete the ones that sort of are no good in the simulation. Just making sure that there's none. Okay, so now we've got our one that's floating up in the air. We can either move it down into position, or I'm just going to delete it for ease. And now we've got our clutter resting on the surface of the landmass up here, and it doesn't look too bad either. So effectively what I can do now is I could go and select all my objects, land included if you want. I could then attach all these objects together, so we'll go and do that now. So one is an editable poly. What I might do is go hide selection. I'm going to select one of the objects. I'm going to select one of the ones in the middle. Because it's an editable poly, I'm going to go to the attach list under edit geometry, open that up, I'm going to go select all because the only things in the scene are these objects. So now, if I select one, they're all selected. I can now unhide my ground. And then if I wanted to go and export this object into UDK as an FBX, I can just go up and go File, Export, and export them into FBX format to then import them into UDK as an asset. Okay, that's the end of this tutorial. I hope you find a use to create some randomized clutter in your UDK games.